I am Raj Kumar. I'm the president and editor-in-chief of Devex. We are a media platform that covers global development issues, certainly including the oceans. This Davos is a very cerebral week. We are going to have a very cerebral panel. We're going to talk about solutions. But I also want you to if this panel will be successful if at the end of it, when you're at your next meal, and you've got a piece of seafood on your plate, you think about some of the issues we're talking about, because this is as personal as it gets. This is something that matters to you, it matters to your family, it matters to the whole planet, right? So we want to get down to those issues. And what is it? You can see there's a little sign outside. I think you probably heard this repeated a lot. I heard Mark Benioff talk about it last night. By 2050, we may have more plastic in the ocean than fish. That's not just a problem because we love the ocean and we want it to be clean. It's a direct attack on human health and nutrition. This is a real problem because much of the world, nearly half the planet, derives a good portion of their protein from seafood. It's a particular problem for a lot of the world's poor who live in communities that rely especially on this or are in jobs, fisher people who are in jobs actually that need to rely on a sustainable ocean. And it's an issue both at the ocean level and inland too, and in freshwater areas too. I'm a fly fisherman myself. It's my passion, my hobby, my addiction maybe. When you go out there and you see a beautiful looking river and you're fishing and then you realize everything in it is really dead. There's no life here. Yeah. That affects you. So this is something that has to affect us at the heart and at the head, and I hope we'll have a great discussion about that. I know we will with this incredible group that has been put together for the event today. Feike, Sijbesma, I think you all know. He's been on many panels and discussions like this because he's a real leader on the issue, the CEO of Royal DSM. We will hear from you about partnerships in particular. Gunhild Stordalen, who is the founder and president of the EAT Foundation, just issued a major report on this in the Lancet that we will talk about as well. Devry, Boughner, Vorwerk, who's the corporate vice president at Cargill, one of the leading corporations working in this space. So fantastic to have you here. And I think we have another panelist who may be joining us in a minute. I'll introduce her when she does arrive. So I thought maybe we could start with you, Feike, and just talk about, okay, we understand the problem. Let's say we're all sold on this. I'm guessing everyone in the room is converted. The people joining us on the live stream are probably converted. How do we actually change this, connect nutrition to cleaning up the oceans? What kind of partnerships or models might actually work?
All kinds of partnerships, all kinds of things. First, there are about 3-4 billion people in the world whose daily intake of proteins, animal proteins, depends on the ocean. So fishing and getting our proteins out of the ocean is important for billions of people. Now, we're also emptying the oceans. And by our climate change, we are emptying the oceans by the oceans themselves, because by the heating, a part of the life in the oceans is going down. So two things, due to climate change, fish go down in the oceans, and we empty the oceans with that speed that we're also emptying it. So we get our food in danger of many people, billions of people in the world. Okay, one of the big things, and just an example of our company, one of the big things is, okay, let me do the fishing, not fishing in the ocean, but in captivity. Fish farms in the harbor, just replicate those things and keep the oceans where it is. Salmon, etc., is mainly coming out of fish farms. However, those fish need to eat something. Yeah. What do they eat in the ocean? Big fish eat small fish. Okay, so what do? We take the small fish out of the ocean and we feed that still to the big fish. We're very sustainable because we don't empty the ocean anymore for the big fish, only the small fish. Now also raising temperature, there is not enough small fish. Costs are increasing, costs of salmon are increasing, but also the omega content in the salmon is going down because there is a shortage of that. So you think that salmon is healthy, but it is less healthy than it was before. Wow. So, do we need to feed these small fish? No, those small fish eat the algae out of the ocean. The algae have the right component. So can we take a few cells out of the algae, put them in a fermenter, make them the oil, and give the oil to the big fish? That is what we, amongst others, have invented and which we are doing right now. We come next year on the market, and this is just one example to make fishing really sustainable and not emptying the ocean, leave the ocean where it is. And that makes also the point that, of course, we have a lot of problems, oceans, climate change, etc. But technology, which maybe partly caused the problem, technology is also a part of the solution to the future.
Can we just quickly, before we move on, just underline this issue, because it was surprising to me. I don't know if it's going to be surprising to others listening, but that the amount of fish taken out of the ocean just as feed for the agricultural industry, how big is this as a problem? You mentioned the example, but how big of a problem?
What do you mean, how big is the problem?
In other words, how much of the fish that we take out of the ocean is used for animal feed as opposed to human consumption?
Oh, it is indirectly all used for human consumption. So a part of the fish which we take out, the anchovies, etc., a lot of the anchovies we take out of the ocean is not for human consumption, but by other fish.
Which then we consume.
Which then is consumed by humans. So at the end, it's all human consumption. But if you look to the magnitude, it is 3 to 4 billion people, more than 20% of the intakes coming out of the oceans, and 90% of the fish in the ocean, which we are using for our intake, is overfished. So with 90% of the fish which we are using for human consumption, there is at this moment at risk. So this automatically cannot continue.
Right.
So or we get a lesser quality fish, which we already here there have today, or people need to switch to something else. Well, to switch to meat is not the best switch to make, to be honest, for the climate.
But
we have an issue here, and therefore we need to make this more sustainable.
It's a perfect segue to Gunhild, because you have really led the idea that there's not a silo of people who love the oceans and people who want to be healthy or care about nutrition. This is one issue. You've issued a report that helps to make that case. How do you see it? How should we start to think about fish and the oceans?
Well, I think we should first of all see food as maybe our biggest opportunity because food is a connector. It connects human health to the health of the planet, to from land to ocean. It connects stakeholders around really a common vision about healthy people on a healthy planet. And food is something that connects the global abstract challenges down to something that everyone cares about. And the changes we are making on our plate literally every day is what matters the most for our own health and the health of the planet. So it's really a powerful narrative. And right now the food system is broken. I started EAT 6 years ago because there was no scientific answer on what to produce and eat that was good for everything, and there was no platform where all the actors of the food system could come together and find solutions and ways to implement them. So this Eat Lancet report was actually the report I was looking for back then when I tried to set up some guidelines for the hotel company I was on the board of. And this report is actually the first ever effort to set scientific targets for how to feed 10 billion people by 2050, a healthy diet within safe environmental limits. And just to say 2 words about it, the aim was to define what is an optimal healthy reference diet in terms of different food groups, grams and calories per day, and then define the maximum impact of our environmental impact that can come from food production, from greenhouse gas emissions, water use, land use, biodiversity loss, and nitrogen and phosphorus. And the good news here is that it turns out to be possible to feed everyone enough healthy food while remaining in a safe operating space. But it will require a radical transformation of the current system, and we need to dramatically reduce food waste and loss, which is obviously not any news for anyone, but we need to invest in improved production, and last but not least, we need a dietary shift. The report suggests that we will have to cut meat and sugar by half while doubling intake of fruit and veg, legumes, nuts, etc. and seafood. The report suggests that the average per capita intake is 28 grams. And according to the current estimates on how much increase we need to see in seafood production of 48% compared to 2010 baseline, this report suggests a doubling, more than a doubling. But if we reduce waste along the value chain, then it's a 60% increase. But it's a really, really important question to ask, how do we get this right? There are so many different species, from tuna and salmon down to bivalves to algae and krill. So how can we optimize production in a way that remains within environmental limits while maximizing nutrition and health outcomes? So what we are now currently discussing with, as an initiative under Friends of Ocean Action with FAO, with Stanford, with WRI and Stockholm Resilience Center, is to do a blue translation of the Eat Lancet framework to look into what will it take, what is the transition pathway or pathways, how can we get this right so we can really use one of our most important pantries of the future, which obviously is the oceans. And again, there are so many unknown that we have to deal with. The impact of microplastic, for example, bivalves, filter feeders absorbing these. So I think scientific targets that we can act on, that can help guide this transition, will be really important.
And I think you're absolutely right. Getting the value of understanding at a global level.
Yes.
What do we have today? What are the assets in the environment? What do we need for human health? And starting to think at that level is critical. At the same time, I want to welcome our new panelists, Hindou Ibrahim, because Hindou is the president of the Association of Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad. And that in the end, we might have a great global plan, but we've got to make it work on the ground in lots of individual contexts, right? So I'd love to hear, I'm sorry to skip ahead, but I'd love to hear from Hindou just on this point, when you think about the future for people in your community, how does aquaculture fit in? How do livelihoods and human health fit into the conversation that we're having?
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, and sorry to be here, coming from the desert and then working around the ice, like after to fall down and all this stuff. So.
You made it,
Yeah,
thank you.
I made it, yes. And of course, also talking about food security and talking about health and ocean is compared to the life that I'm living here, because it's a different component and different needs that people have. So as you know, Africa have like over than 30 countries who are landlocked. And then coming from the indigenous communities, then we know that we have indigenous people around the world living in the Iceland and living in islands and living in forests and desert. So who have like nothing to do with the sea, but very far from it. So when we talk about the nutrition particularly, and then we talk about the importance of fish that feeding in the human being, for me, I'm just asked the question, I like the nearest sea of Chad is like more than 1,000 kilometers. And then with all the infrastructure, it's better go to Paris than going to the just a neighboring country. So how are we going to feed that? And with all the composition, you want to have it in the cold ice to get it to the communities and how it's going to work. So then, in the other hand, we say like community are growing up very quickly, and then how are we going to feed them? So combine two of them from my side, I'm seeing like the family agriculture is the one we are counting on it, and that one we have to value and count on it forever. And then we have also beyond the ocean, like the fresh water, I'm coming around the Lake Chad. So if you can see the picture, like from 25,000 kilometers square water when my mother was young, and actually now we have like about 1,500, like 90% of water just evaporated because of the heat. So we have a lot of fish on it, who is feeding all the neighboring countries, Chad, Cameroon, Niger, Nigeria, and beyond to Central African Republic. So how maybe we can restore this ecosystem and then have the family fishing there, and how we can restore the family agriculture rather than like industrialized agriculture who are doing the land grabbing, who can respect also like the ecosystem there. And we talk a lot about the beef. who is like one of the deforestation drivers, and one of also like AFPAT. But it's different. When we talk about the Sahel, so we have the pastoralists. And that make like the combined restoration of the biodiversity. So from my community, like when we live from one place to another one as nomadic peoples, so it's in our livelihood to leave the land to get restored so naturally. And the time that we make like 360 days and we come back to the point zero, we have all the ecosystem restored naturally. So for me, I'm so interested to see your study, how it can go beyond the developed countries and the needs of developed countries for food waste, but to those billions of the peoples who are restoring naturally, but who need also the equity in them life and livelihood to make them healthy, very like normal with others.
Can I just
Very
comment?
quickly, yeah, go ahead.
Because I think, I mean, it's an excellent point, and I have to say that the report looks at the global level, and it acknowledged that in certain areas of the world, particularly in Africa, meat and animal protein intake will actually increase, which calls for an even steeper reduction in other parts of the world, which are now over-consuming. But the livelihood and the social dimension here, it's so critical, and it's currently not in there. And I think that is something that we absolutely have to integrate in a blue translation type of.
And Devry, I want to bring you into the discussion in part because you are the connection point at Cargill to so many thousands of farmers around the world.
Yeah.
And so we take the kind of the technology that's available, the opportunity to change the way we farm, but in terms of delivering it,
Right.
we need companies that actually are connected to the farming industry and individual farmers. So how do you see it from your perspective? How is this shift happening to a more sustainable fish and aquaculture industry?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that we really appreciate that the Friends of the Ocean Action would acknowledge that we need to have the conversation around food and nutrition as it relates to the ocean. Because at Cargill, we don't see the ocean as bodies of water that sit off here while everything's happening on the land. In fact, for a company that operates in 70 countries around the world, and we trade with well over 130 countries, it is definitely part of an integrated system, an integrated food system that is critical to feeding the global population. And so as we're seeing, you know, this connection between farmers and the ocean and feeding people, what we're seeing is that there's an increased, as the population growth we all know is coming, there's an increased demand for protein. That is a good thing in the sense of when people go from $2 a day to $10 a day as GDP rises, they begin to move to more protein-based diets, which is actually a good thing. The challenge is that we all know, we're sitting here talking about the ocean, that there is no more capacity in the ocean to deliver alternative sources of protein, healthy protein, seafood diets. And so the challenge before us is to figure out exactly how do you work from farm all the way to plate in this complicated system to ensure that we are getting back to a healthy ocean environment. And there are a couple innovations that I can highlight, or two areas. Aquaculture was mentioned. You know, Cargill has for many years been feeding fish around the world. And in fact, we are seeing that we are pivoting and even going more into the aqua space. We have 38 facilities around the world that feed aquaculture. And you know, it's integrated in many ways within the ocean itself, or sometimes in rivers, like in Mekong. We saw the Prime Minister of Vietnam yesterday, who's making some bold commitments around the health of the Mekong. I mean, even the Mississippi River that feeds, you know, out into the ocean, that actually is a really important part of feeding the world, but at the same time, it's integrated into the ocean. So we're seeing this increase in protein. We are feeding fish around the world in sustainable ways, and we're looking for innovations. I'll give you one, just to wrap your brain around it. I don't know how many of you know or that when shrimp are hungry, they make a noise. Okay, they make a noise.
I didn't know.
So my husband says I don't listen to him, but we listen to shrimp at Cargill, and this is really critical, this type of innovation, because when it comes to sustainable aquaculture, we listen to the noise. We feed the shrimp. And when they stop making the noise, we stop feeding, as opposed to just kind of visibly looking and feeding. That's cut down on 30% of the volume in feed. It cuts down on the waste, and it works toward a more sustainable shrimp, but also a healthier shrimp. So that's one example. The other was mentioned in terms of how do we ensure that we're still not just ensuring healthy diets for the seafood, but also people. And fish oil has been something that we've been depending on for some time. We're innovating around plant-based types of omega-3s, so you don't have to pull those fish out of the ocean just to get the benefits of the fish oil. Those are two examples. Last, I'll tell you the innovations, because remember, we're moving food all around the world. So we have an ocean transport business where we're working with shipping companies. We're but one actor that's moving food. Food must move around the world in order to go from areas of need to areas of surplus to areas of deficit. In our ocean transportation business, we're working as part of a global maritime solution to reduce greenhouse gases. So in the next 2 years, we at any one time have 650 vessels chartered on the ocean. We're reducing by 15% our greenhouse gases over the next 2 years. And that's just a starting point.
Yeah.
But the beauty of the innovation is quite simple. It's bringing all of the shipping companies together. It's just basic connectivity to figure out how we're actually going to lean into this issue and hold ourselves accountable. So those are a few of the examples.
Those are great
Aqua
examples.
and shipping.
Those are great. And Feike, I want to bring you back into the discussion because I'd like a little bit of a reality check. You know a lot about this issue. You run a very innovative, forward-looking company. I'm listening to this discussion. I'm getting energized. Like, okay, we kind of know what we need to do. They're great innovations. They're incredible people on the ground thinking about the future and what it will mean for their communities. Yet, we know we're at this point where the ocean is being totally overfished. The climate is changing so quickly that places like Lake Chad are drying up. What do we need to do to turn this? Are we being overly optimistic here? Is there something else we can do to get us to the point where this will actually save the planet? We feel like it may be slipping away from us.
Yes and no. I was the other day by the way, with Peter Thompson. In a panel with moderated by Tom Friedman, and he said, I only want to know about the solutions that you have, which are scalable. If your solutions are not scalable, it's hobbyism. It's fun, but not for now to discuss. Maybe at the evening drinks we discuss the hobbies. And I think there are many initiatives, there are many good things, but the big question is, can we scale it? Can we scale it fast?
Yeah.
And indeed, otherwise I agree with Tom, it is a little bit hobbyism. And it is nice, and it is nice entrepreneur, nice small, etc. So if 90% of the fish which we take out of the ocean is being overfished at this moment and is being threatened, then we have a big problem. Then we cannot continue to eat fish by just emptying the ocean. Then we need to go to contained fishing, meaning fish farms. And then we need to think very carefully when we feed those fish in the fish farm. Like I said, preferably not the small fish, because then we continue, but algae or whatever, and basically switching to plant-based or microbiological fish.
The group
That is what we can do, and that we need to scale. To do that on a massive scale. This moment we're building a huge factory in Nebraska for that kind of oil for the fish farms. Huge factory. On a former Cargill premises, by the way. See the collaboration.
Smart people.
Right. On a big scale. Because let's realize that the oceans form a very essential part of our life. More than 50% of the oxygen in the world is coming from the oceans and not coming from the woods, which we think. The oceans plays a very important role in temperature regulations. The oceans play a very important role in the whole system. And via climate change, we are challenging that. We are looking to the boundaries of the oceans, and the oceans can still resist what we're doing with climate change. If there would not be an ocean, I mean, the rise of the temperature in the world would be factors more already today without the ocean. So they are saving us right now, but not forever. And once you have brought that system totally out of disbalance, you run a problem. There's another problem in the ocean, and we didn't discuss that yet. And that is, since 50 years, this world is enriched with plastic. We made it out of oil, and we didn't have that 50, 60 years ago. It was a great invention and changed our life. A lot of the plastic is now in the ocean. If you think about the circular economy, basically there's enough plastic in the ocean to put a lot of factories down and to just recycle.
If you just take it out and
Yeah.
use it again, right?
Okay, so there are several initiatives to take the plastic out of the ocean. One of the projects that several of you here know is an initiative Boy and Slot, where I support the ocean cleanup. Not that easy. It will go with hurdles at this moment. You all know that. The first system is out, and it is not going that smooth as we hoped or thought. Although me, as a company who was used to pilot factories at big scale, and that does not always work like that, I'm not overly worried.
When you try something, you try
When
something
we try,
innovative, it doesn't
we
always
did it
click at
all in the
first.
lab, and then we did it all in the pilot factory, and then it all worked, and then we built a big factory, and holy, it doesn't work. So I've seen that before. You need to downscale again, and to start up again, and to readjust. But the initiative, of course, in itself is great, because there's a lot of plastic, and if we wait another 25, 50 years, then the plastic is microplastic, and became
it's really hard to
feedstuff
come out.
for the
Yeah.
fish industry or our supply chain. The other thing what we're doing there is looking to the supply of plastic, so-called supply, into the oceans. Only a part is being dumped in the oceans, by the way, by mankind. There's nobody else dumping it. Dumping it in the ocean, but a large stream is coming from the rivers, via the rivers into the ocean. And there are 8, 9 rivers in the world who supply a major part. So if we can block, what we're doing now, those rivers, then at least we can stop the supply. So this is another angle of the oceans, which we need to address. And we need to understand, and I'm like that the Friends of the Oceans is putting this on the agenda, how important the oceans play with our food supply, with our climate, with everything we have. It is an essential part of our life. And we're treating it as a little bit like we live on the land and there is some water. It is confusing because you need to build a bridge or a boat to get over it.
Yeah, or
it is
some-
much more function than just that.
Right, or that someone else is going to take care of this. We'll just wait and someone else will do it. So, Gunhild, one group not represented on the panel is government. And I'm wondering, as we think about these issues, we've got companies that may be trying to raise the bar themselves on energy efficiency or better quality fish and hoping that the market dynamic works. What do we need from government?
Well, first of all, we need unprecedented collaboration across, at all levels, involving all actors, and governments have to be, really ramp up the efforts now. And if we think about it, it's really ironically that we are currently subsidizing and producing what is making us sick. Around half the world's population is currently malnourished. And at the same time, the food system is the biggest driver of environmental degradation, and we have so many disconnected policy instruments that
Right.
governments now need to look into how can we make comprehensive, consistent policies from farm to fork and down the waste bin, terrestrial and marine systems that really support and incentivize and regulate what we need from health, environmental, and social perspectives.
Right, if you think about the situation of Hindou and your people in Chad, if we continue to have the circumstance we have now, maybe the value of fish and other kinds of marine animals will just go up so much that for your community, it's better to just ship it out, and it'll be a cash crop as opposed to something you can actually consume. And those dynamics, without some kind of government intervention, may take hold.
Exactly. For sure, like people say, when we come far from the oceans, maybe we do not think about it. We really think about it and care about it. Like 4 years ago, just to give you a quick example, I do not know how to swim. I went to Seychelles, and then I just jumped to the water, just trying to see, and then I saw the fish. And then I said, the first thing I'm going to do, diving. I did my initiation. And now I have like my double lessons of diving, then I love doing it. So I'm always like wonder why people looking the sea also as just like, we need to fish, we need to get off what we need. No, I'm completely agree with what you said. No, ocean is our life. Being in the far away, we know how much ocean is playing in our role of livelihood for the future. So I think government play a big role. There is illegal fishing around all the international water. We are seeing that, we are reading that in the newspapers. So this illegal fishing have to stop. It cannot stop without like legislation, but legislation are there, but they need a proper implementations. And that like economy have a big role to play on it. So it have to deal also with corruptions. So for the community like mine, who is like thinking always to survive, why are we have always to survive? We deserve life. And deserving life is deserving equity, deserving also sharing, deserving also like implementation of this regulation who can be applied to everybody. Yeah. Even you are in the sea, outside of the sea, you have to think about the one planet is like for the one peoples. And then those communities who are also far away, they know the importance of the fish, but they want to have it. It's very far, but no, we want to keep it because it's also beautiful for the nature. So when we see what we destroy in the land, we saw when we destroy one tree, we destroy like the chain of the ecosystem. We destroy the birds who stay there. We destroy like the insects. We destroy like many other species that we do not see. Of course, inside the water is the same thing. When we destroy like one kind of fish and then we make it vulnerable, of course, the chain of all the ecosystem from the coral to all the small fish, bigger fish, we're destroying it. So for me, it's how we can keep this balance. We miss in the earth, like in the soil, we miss this balance, how we can keep this balance inside the water. And keeping this one can help us to be also human, but help us also to survive. Then I will end by that. It's very innovative to think about the food, but please think about how we can save this ocean, but think about those peoples who are getting vulnerable. They do not deserve to survive. They deserve a life, and proper life, it's meaning also protecting the environment where we live on it for now. So that's the present, it's not the future.
Thank you for that. You've got a very unique perspective on that. I just can only imagine living in a community where the lake that supplies life to so many people in that community across countries has shrunk by 90%. I've only seen photographs of it.
More than 40 millions.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe that's the kind of perspective we all need to hear to think about the oceans too. That in our lifetime we could see dramatic change in the wrong direction that's really palpable if we don't fix this. Devry, can you give me your final thoughts here as we wrap up?
I just want to pick up on what is government's role and agree, Gunhild, it is going to take unprecedented cooperation between governments. And at a time where we're seeing governments not talk to each other, it's on us as the global citizenry to expect our governments to sit down and connect. And I want to offer a counterintuitive idea here, because it's going to take within each government interagency coordination between the Environment Agency, the Health Agency, right, Trade, Foreign Ministry. But my counterintuitive idea here is that we need to get the globe back to the table at the WTO and discuss trade, because trade is going to be, it sounds counterintuitive. Gee, Devry, you're saying we need to trade more on the ocean so that we can actually save the ocean. That's exactly what I'm saying. I'll give you an example. In the US, shrimpers can only provide about 20% of the domestic demand in the United States. It's maybe even less than that. Yet there are protections on importing shrimp from another place that can produce it more efficiently, more sustainably, ship it to the United States, in bulk, which means per mile you're shipping at less, less cost to the overall environment. And when governments aren't sitting down and talking about what is the most efficient way to produce food and then move that food, and by the way, it gets moved on the oceans, then we're all losing. And so we need to have an expectation as part of a kind of a global movement as part of Friends of the Ocean, that we ask our governments to get back together and sit in the WTO and address the issues around trade, because in there are issues around shipping, there are issues around fishing, illegal fishing, there are issues around sustainability. And when governments put barriers up and we don't connect, the poor people suffer.
Feike, one last thought from you. We have to close.
All right. Mankind is by far the most successful species who changed the Darwinistic concept for adaptation. There's only those species will survive who can adapt. And mankind adapted in such a way that said the ultimate form of adaptation is to let the world adapting to what we want. So we're the only species changing the world into our benefit. The rest adapted themselves to survive in the world. And we all welcome on Mother Earth right now because we all live in very interesting times. This is the first time in human history where we are not unlimited growing anymore, or at least have the discussions where with the way we adapted the world to our benefit is going to harm us again. And that we need to be that smart in order to survive again, to put limitations on the way we adapt the world in our benefit to our own benefit again for the long term. And imagine Davos 20 years ago, 30 years ago. That was not the discussions here. The discussions were about economic growth. And for the first time, the last 10 years, last 15 years, and the coming 10 years, and hopefully not the coming 100 years only, we have those discussions to change that systems. What happened is we now have hosted in Ananas a committee on global adaptation for climate. And that is to your point. We are working, whilst we're working on mitigation, we're working on adaptation right now, because the people who did not cause climate change see now already the impact. Yep. And we need to change the ultimate form of adaptation that mankind has invented. Again, we need to give that a switch.
Change ourselves, yeah. Well, two pieces of homework on that great point, Feike. One is read the Eat Lancet report. That will feed your brain. And then next time you're sitting in front of a plate of seafood, delicious seafood, think about it and think about how we can ensure it's there for the next generation and generations beyond. We at Devex will continue to cover this topic. We think it's one of the most important ones in human and global development. So thank you for being a part of the discussion today. Thank you to Friends of Ocean Action for putting this on.
Thank you.